Hey, what's going on, everybody? So today I'm going to be discussing a issue that just happened in the news. And essentially, what that issue is about is on December 4th, 2024, Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Health, was fatally shot outside the New York Hampton Midtown in what police have described as a targeted attack. The shooting occurred in public space and involving one of the most prominent figures of the U.S. healthcare system, has raised significant questions. Was this an act intended to be a revolutionary statement against the healthcare system widely criticized for its inequalities, or should this be dismissed as an act of a mentally disturbed individual, thereby dismissing its potential societal relevance? So, if you guys not aware, basically a vigilante young man who's around 24 years old. He's an Italian American. He did come from an affluent family, and basically he shot and killed basically the United Health CEO Brian Thompson, and it has sparked a lot of controversy. And what I want to actually walk through today is what are the implications of this? Because I'm hearing a lot of people online that are essentially making multiple arguments. You have the left, or what you call Republicans, basically, I mean, Democrats basically saying that, hey, they're focusing on the societal implications. And many of them, even though they may not be happy that this young man killed this basically innocent man from the perspective of him being justified being killed, but they're arguing that, hey, we need to focus on what the message behind this was, which is this kid clearly targeted them because he has some ideology that believes essentially that basically the health insurance and the health industry is immoral, corrupt, and he wanted to make a statement. Now, on the right, they don't want to discuss the fact that healthcare needs to be reformed in America. They're more focused on basically saying it's unacceptable for the left or Democrats to be basically cheering this person on who just murdered somebody in cold blood. And so they're totally want to ignore the conversation about healthcare reform. And the reason that they want to ignore it is because ideologically they have a problem the way Democrats think. They believe that Democrats are basically not focused on fundamental values that keep society in order, and they're willing to sacrifice that for social justice. And so instead of addressing the fact that the big issue that affects us all is, unfortunately, is not the fact that one CEO was killed, but healthcare in this country is out of control and needs to be reformed. But instead of focusing on that, Republicans are more focused on making sure that ideologically the way they present themselves in the public is vastly different than the Democrats. And so what you have is basically party politics where both sides are arguing their side while basically missing the big story. And the big story is, what about society has radicalized this young man to do this? Why are we seeing more and more radicalization of people in general, which shows basically the dysfunction of our political system as a whole? Because the reality is, whether this guy is sane or have mental health issues, we have been seeing an uptick in mass shootings and radical behavior from people. Now, the problem with the Republicans, in my personal opinion, is instead of acknowledging some of the issues that the Democrats are bringing up, they're more interested in virtual signaling that they're so much better than the Democrats. There's so much emotional control. They're so much more logical. They're so much ideologically or principled than the Democrats, and totally won't give the Democrats any ground on the things that they're saying. Hey, there's social injustice. The healthcare reform industry needs to be reformed. They're not giving any of that credence. They're saying, hey, you guys are emotional. You guys live in la la land, and we're not going to give you any credence. And so both sides are not really doing what's best for actual society because they're so busy trying to win an ideological war that the actual issues that actually affect our lives are not getting addressed. So that's my little introduction into this. So let's talk about some context, right? And one thing I want to talk about is some possible perspectives. Okay. One perspective could be to dismiss the act as irrelevant. Now, what do I mean by that? If the perpetrator is mentally disturbed, the killing might be viewed as a unrelated to healthcare reform and dismissed entirely. Now, why is this important? Right? So there's a lot of people on the right when it comes to Republicans who are taking the argument that, hey, how dare you Democrats cheer on somebody who killed the man in cold blood? Are they kind of right for taking that position? Absolutely. But if they solely only condemn this young man who killed this person, who it was not the right thing to do, and without addressing the underlying reason and environment that made him want to do this, then that's a disservice to the American people and everybody involved. So even though the Republicans are correct to some of the more extreme left Democrats who are saying, I'm glad he got shot or celebrating what happened, they're not completely right because they need to acknowledge what the Democrats are saying, which is health reform is something that we need to look at, especially after like something like this happened. Instead of giving that credence, they're just focused on showing how ridiculous the left is. And from that perspective, the Democrats are wrong. I mean, for the Republicans are wrong. From the perspective of the Democrats, the ones who are getting emotional and saying, hey, this guy, Brian Thompson, deserves it. And he deserves it because he's the CEO of a company that has the highest rate of denials, which is 32% out of any other health insurance company in the country. Now, let's look at a couple facts. First of all, United Health is the largest provider, and there is a direct proportion of denial percentage directly positively correlated with the size of the organization, meaning that the larger the healthcare industry is, the larger the company is, the larger percentage of denials they'll have. That's generally true from the data that I looked at, which means that if you're the largest, you're going to have 32%. If you're the second largest, you might have 22%. If you're the third largest, you might have 17%, and so on. It's not perfectly correlated, but there is some correlation. So the reason they're they have the highest denial rate could be related to the fact that they have such a large base that in order to control costs as an insurance company, they have to deny a certain percentage. Now, I'm not saying that's moral. I'm just simply saying that that could explain some of the reason why they have the highest, because they are the largest. But the key issue here is we know healthcare reform has been an issue forever. The Democrats have been trying to reform healthcare for over 90 years. And the groundbreaking legislation called Obamacare basically accomplished one of the greatest feats that the Democratic Party has been trying to accomplish for several decades. And even though they don't give Obama credit for that, he did push through Obamacare, which over 30 to 50 million Americans use every day. And it's actually very useful. I used it personally myself. But not to get off topic, the Democrats are being emotional in the sense that they are correct to say, hey, let's look at why this young man did this. This is a good thing. Not the fact that Brian Thompson's is dead, but the attention that this is bringing on this topic in this moment needs to be galvanized to do some good, which is let's start looking at these companies. Let's use this as a catalyst to make some reform. And I agree with them that we do need to use this moment and this opportunity to potentially do some reforms. And for the Republicans to totally reject that on the basis of arguing with them about the fact that they're willing to say that maybe this is a good thing is doing everybody's a disservice. But it's also a disservice for too many Democrats to celebrate this happening, right? Because then you're going to alienate a whole bunch of rational people who are saying we should not be celebrating this. And we do not want to create a culture in society where we're celebrating things that are not correct, that can't basically support a sustainable society, right? So if we're celebrating people getting murdered and killed just because we think it's something that should be done based on a policy that we don't like, society will devolve into anarchy. So the Republicans are correct to push back on some of these sentiments. And the Democrats need to acknowledge that what they're kind of letting you know is true. So basically, the truth is it's in a middle ground. And the middle ground, what society wants you to say, because what they're saying is extreme, and what the Republicans saying they're saying. The Republicans are saying you're completely wrong. This man was a crazy person, and this has nothing to do with the healthcare system. This has nothing to do with Brian Thompson and what his company is doing. This has nothing to do with this young man being a hero. This is just some crazy guy that think he can kill people. And by dismissing all the underlying implications of why he did it, it's a disservice. And the Democrats are saying, no, this is a hero. This is a guy who's willing to sacrifice his life for a bigger picture, for the greater good, to bring attention to this issue. And that's partially true, right? It's partially true that he did it, but he may not have done it in a sound mind, which negates some of their support for this young man. So let's get to the point. The point is, the truth is probably in the middle ground. This person probably is not as rational as we think, because think about it. If you're going to give up your life, right, to advance a cause, how much good did you really do by killing one CEO? This young man is probably never going to see the light of day again. His life is over. He's 24. He came from an affluent family who have large real estate portfolios. He has money. He's well educated. I think he has a background in engineering. I think he was going to grad school. He had the money, the time, and the potential education to actually lead a coalition of people, and he can spend the next 30 years of his life making the system change. Because if you think about it, if you're willing to kill somebody in cold blood and go to jail the rest of your life and basically give up your life, he could have did the reverse and dedicated his life to getting this cause solved. So why give up your life and kill somebody when you can dedicate your life? Well, his ideology, because he did have a manifesto that was basically talking about essentially his framing of things was that ultimately the power structures in society that control the world through violence, and basically power doesn't hand over power. So he said fundamentally the only way to make real headwind is to fight fire with fire, violence with violence. And on a macro scale, on a global international scale, he's right. Ultimately, countries are controlled by borders. Borders are backed up by military. So fundamentally, that's true. That's the only thing that changed. However, if you look at all the major tipping points that fundamentally shifted society, there was mass violence. And that mass violence wasn't something that one individual did. World War II was involved with several major countries. Until Pearl Harbor was basically bombed, we wasn't part of that massive war. So killing one small healthcare CEO is not a large enough tipping point for basically to reform the entire healthcare system that's worth billions, if not collectively trillions. Which means that if he thought giving up his life and killing one CEO was enough to make a significant dent and basically cause a revolution, this young man did a miscalculation. So that if you rationally understand, any sound mind can see that his actions that he did will not have a profound effect and move the needle, then he did a miscalculation. But that miscalculation, it's assuming that that calculation was done with a rational mind. Well, from my assessment, killing one CEO and going to jail for the rest of your life, there was no other pre-existing catalyst or movement going on that you could have latched onto and pushed it over the top. They call that the precipice. The precipice is right at the edge. Like the civil rights movement, it was right at the edge of happening. And then if you have a leader like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, on the wave of that, he can push it over the tipping point and cause a revolution. But even Malcolm X and Martin Luther King couldn't do that if that pre-existing wave of tipping point didn't already exist. Well, there's no pre-existing wave or tipping point around healthcare that already pre-existed, which means that even if you kill a CEO and the whole world sees it, one action can't create that tipping point. Now, he could have started the conversation, but to me, it shows that he either did a miscalculation, which means that he's not that smart, or, which is the more likely, he's mentally disturbed in some type of way where he wasn't capable of doing a proper calculation. And so the most likely fact is he's somewhat mentally disturbed. He's aware of his ideology. He's aware of the healthcare system. He's aware of the fact that these things in healthcare is not correct. But he's not of sound mind, because clearly killing somebody in Times Square in Manhattan, where there's one of the most densely populated places on the planet, especially in the United States, cameras everywhere. This guy 3D printed a gun, so he knows about technology. He knows there's cameras everywhere. That's why he's wearing a hoodie. He's not in a sound mind if he was trying to get away. Because number one, if he was of a sound mind, you wouldn't be in McDonald's. You wouldn't be talking to girls. You would be hiding underground for months, if not years, if your plan was to not get caught. Secondly, if your plan was not getting caught, you would have never killed them the way you did. You basically killed them in one of the most densely populated places in the country, in broad daylight, and basically they can reverse engineer everywhere you went by simply backtracking on the cameras all the way throughout the country. And there's cameras everywhere today. You can literally do that. There was a worldwide manhunt for this guy. You had FBI and everybody else involved. They can go to any business and systematically review all the cameras and reverse engineer their way back to where you were last seen. And that's exactly what they did. So to me, if your goal is to reform healthcare and you come from a well-to-do family with money, it makes no sense not to do this in such a way that makes it very, very clear that you understand the size and scope of what you're up against, right? So if he was a sound mind, the more sound thing to do was find another way other than killing the United Health CEO. Second of all, why did he target Brian Thompson? Well, did he have any personal beefs with Brian Thompson, or did he look up healthcare and then find out what's the largest healthcare company in the United States and who have the highest denial rate? And from there decided, I want to make a statement, and then chose Brian Thompson solely because he happened to be the CEO of that particular company. And basically, there was no personal grievance against Brian Thompson, but he chose him because he was in a very strategic position that allowed basically Luigi Mangione to accomplish his goal. Now, here's the $1 million question. The $1 million question. The $1 million question is, even if he was mentally disturbed, which means that he's not thinking straight, resorting to violence and thinking you can kill an innocent CEO to make your message. Even if we all agree that that's not justified, even if the healthcare system is bad in this country, even if we acknowledge that maybe this dude wasn't all there, does that negate the truth behind the issue that it has highlighted? Does it negate the fact that the healthcare system needs to be reformed? And even though he did this, and we shouldn't necessarily support or justify this, we can simultaneously acknowledge the problem with our country. The fact is, it takes an act like this, even though we don't want to support it because we don't want our society to devolve into anarchy, that something's wrong with our country where it takes these type of acts to get the politicians and the powers that be to look at these issues in a serious way. And I guess to give a little credence to the Democrats, they're saying, unfortunately, we're so fed up with the double talk and side talk of Republicans and the powers that be that we're going to fix it, we're going to reform it through the democratic system, through the process that we all agreed in, that they're like, you know what? If this is what it takes to get change, then we're no longer going to play your game of denouncing stuff. And so that's basically why the Democrats have a problem with the Republicans. It's not the fact that they don't know that the Republicans are somewhat right, that we shouldn't be celebrating this young man. We shouldn't be celebrating anarchy and vigilantism. They know that. But they're saying, hey, if I play your game, Republicans, and denounce it on call, that simultaneously allow you to sweep under the rug the main issue why this young man did what he did. And so now both sides are in a stalemate. And both sides are at an extreme position in society right now where I'm not willing to give a ground, even if it means me being taking positions that are not only immoral but irrational on both sides. Republicans are being irrational too to act like they don't see the bigger picture, and Democrats are being irrational to block out the fact that the Republicans are correct and say, hey, we're going to just cheer for this guy and support this guy anyways. Now, what is the biggest takeaway from this? The biggest takeaway for me is look at how polarized society. This is not a good sign for the United States. It's not a good sign that both sides of the aisle are taking extreme illogical positions against each other, that they're at their throats where they can't even agree on things and come to compromise. That shows a breakdown of society. To me, it represents kind of the aging and maturing of capitalism. And what capitalism have showed for the last 200 years is that the way the system and game is set up with Keynesian democratic republic system, that capitalism in its currently form basically produces better lives for poor countries over time, but it also simultaneously produced consolidation of wealth and inequality. What do I mean by that? That means that capitalism has took America out of poverty relative to the rest of the world, but it also produces inequality. Now, you might be saying, how can it take you out of poverty and produce inequality simultaneously? Well, implementing capitalist systems allow countries to produce economic incentive-based systems that are extremely productive. So a country that has maybe a level 1 style of living now can move to a level 3 standard of living. But what you don't understand is when you were at a level 1 standard of living, maybe the wealth was distributed somewhat favorably and fairly. But with capitalism, because of the consolidation nature of capitalism, which means that the more capital you have, the more power you accrue, and the more power you accrue, the more opportunity you can take advantage of when new opportunities come up. So that means that if you're the banks or you're a rich family, when new technology comes out and you already have access to the capital, the technology that allowed new millionaires to be minted is controlled by the people who control the capital, which they get to pick the winners and losers of the new technology that produced the new millionaires. So which means that over time, even though you might have new millionaires and entrepreneurs creating new companies and becoming rich, the capital, the investment banks, the hedge funds, the commercial banks, they are giving and lending that money to a small amount of people who are now lending that money to entrepreneurs to produce this building. So only a smaller and smaller and smaller amount of people are getting rich. And so what happens is, even though our quality of life when it comes to producing things, having product services, is better than the rest of the world, the distribution of power and wealth is consolidated into a smaller people's hands. So the question is, we need a trade-off between being wealthy, standard of living, and power, the distribution of power. The problem is, even though America is the most wealthy country in the world, it's also the most consolidated when it comes to the distribution of wealth and power. So yeah, your lifestyle is better, your apartment looks better, your energy access look better, your health and your clothing look better, but you're a slave. you don't control anything. And a smaller and smaller amount of people are controlling everything. And that's where we're at in 2024. We're at a place where people are feeling that in their daily lives. You're seeing more and more mass shootings. You're seeing more and more CEOs and people getting killed. You're seeing our president of the United States on the campaign trail getting shot at. Usually, when you see behavior like this, that shows that the social contract and the social fabric of society by the citizens are no longer accepted. And we're at the early stages of the degradation of our nation. That's why you have these mass shooters. Now the right wants to dismiss these people as just crazy, and they are crazy because it's not a good idea to go kill a CEO thinking that you're going to change the healthcare system, and it's not a good idea to kill an innocent person to do it, and it's not a good idea to give up your life. We're talking about Luigi Mangione, or I can't even pronounce his last name. When you come from an affluent family where you're educated, you could have done a lot of things to lead people and really deal with this issue and get a lot farther than just killing one CEO and then you're locked in the prison the rest of your life. So clearly he's not thinking clearly, but that does not dismiss what he did. Should what he be celebrated like a hero? Not from the perspective of morality, but from the perspective of social change and revolutionary catalyst. One could argue that this could be celebrated. Unfortunately, we don't want to celebrate somebody who don't deserves a death, but let's be honest, one person is not more important than 360 million people in society. And so there's a bigger issue that even supersedes Brian Thompson, even though it's tragic that he was killed. That one person is not more important than the biggest issue of healthcare. Not to even mention how many people actually are dying on a daily basis by not getting treatment, suffering on a daily basis because they have chronic conditions that insurance know they have no intention of basically covering, right? So what this comes down to is we're seeing acceleration of extremes in this country. And it's clear, in my personal opinion, that it's because of the distribution of wealth. It's because the consolidation of power. And now everyday citizens are starting to feel it. Not only are they starting to feel it, but it's a reason throughout history, major powers, major countries control the media. Because when they control information, when they control the narrative, they control you. And now in the 25 years in the internet age, they're losing that influence. And you're slowly seeing the social contract and the fabric of society breaking down. And that's what the real takeaway of this is. This is not even necessarily about healthcare. This is about a young man who are seeing the same issues that we see on a daily basis, who may have some mental health issues on top of it, acting out. And even though we don't morally agree what he done, the statement and the things he bring up are legit. And it's imperative that we do not ignore it. And that's the big takeaway. That's the big lesson. My name is Arif Shabazz. Thank you for your time.